Welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel Hubbard and I are continuing with part 2 of this 3-part series on your most intimate relationships. Last week was about chemistry, the beginning stages. This week is about conflict, and next week will be about commitment. Before we get started, if you are interested in meeting one-on-one with us for coaching or for any other reason, you can contact us at theartofgrowth.org. Our website, and that is also the place to find out about the corporate trainings we do for team health around communication, conflict, the Enneagram, of course, and all of that. Also, make sure you're signed up for our newsletter at theartofgrowth.org. And sometimes we throw some additional content on Instagram as well, which is just called Art of Growth. But for now, let's jump in with part 2 of this series, talking about conflict.
All right, we're talking about conflict.
Yeah, these stages, the elements of a relationship, the most intimate of our lives. So chemistry, conflict, and commitment.
Conflict is something that once we say that word, I can feel the collective don't want to,
tightening.
because it's the word itself is so negative that even starting off with that word is like, yeah, okay, we probably have to listen to this just to ways to work through it and get to the other side. But don't take that word like in everything that you think it might mean. It's what I'm thinking about this word more as a sense. What happens when you both go from this chemistry, shared likes, dislikes, to suddenly you wake up and you're like, oh, actually, I don't really like this about her or him. He annoys me so much with this, with this particular
Hope they don't
behavior.
do that again.
Yeah. Oh man, it is exactly right. It is so difficult because it's the part that you just you're waking up, right? It's the whole thing. I mean, Carl Jung talked about this back in the early 1900s. What happens when you have that wake up? It's that waking up to, oh no, this circle, this culture, this environment that I was raised in that I didn't even know I was raised. It's like a fish in water. Don't even know that I'm in water until you're pulled out of it. And that's when you realize, oh, there is something that I didn't realize I was a part of that was a part of me. And I don't know that I like it as much. I don't know that I feel like I quite agree with this, or I feel comfortable with this particular behavior that my partner has been doing for a long time. That initially, I don't know why I had the tolerance. Suddenly I don't have the tolerance for that.
Also, you don't even notice it.
You didn't notice it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or there's things that you didn't even realize you had as expectations that haven't shown up yet.
That's true. Expectations is a big deal.
Oh, it's a huge thing. I always tell people, when you meet someone, you've been writing this in a journal with invisible ink your whole life subconsciously about what you expect a partner to be like. And then you basically hand it to this person when you commit to each other. And it's like, this is your job description, but it's blank. And you don't even realize it until there's a violation.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes as a total surprise. What? Why would you do that? Do what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I think your word disorientation is the best. The conflict is sometimes external. Sometimes it's just an internal thing of whoa.
Yeah.
You're not who I thought you were.
Yeah.
I'm not showing up as who I thought I was.
Yeah.
Because the beginning is you like me and I like you. And this is I don't know if I like that about you. And this thing that I just did, I don't think I like this about me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So all of a sudden it's just the ground beneath you just quivers a little bit. What?
Oh no, it's disorientation is a real thing. I think about my relationship with Patty, and she's definitely more oriented towards self-preservation naturally, as it's her second, but because she's a 6, it really is pronounced in her as being a second instinct. So she goes there pretty quickly. So the sexual part, both of us aligned on. We get along great. Those first few months of relationship, it was just wonderful. Lots of excitement, lots of fun. But when we started thinking about marriage, it started shifting to planning into nesting, future, the things that have to do with the rhythms and the routines of life. And I remember thinking, I'm starting to feel a shift in her. And then that shift continued as her attention went towards creating a nest, creating a comfortable environment for us, a home.
Yeah.
And that was an expectation that surprised me. Why didn't I have that? That's obvious, but I didn't have that as as part of my expectation of how the relationship would be. And same thing when we had AJ, our kid, was like, oh, all this attention now is going to him, which I wanted that to happen too. But then what happens to our relationship? There's a shift dynamically there.
Yeah.
So there's always like the big ones that happen, I think, in relationships with people.
Yeah.
But then there's also the smaller ones where like I had tolerance for some behaviors that now I didn't have anymore.
Yeah.
She had tolerance for some of mine, didn't have it anymore. And what we want to name that as in the moment when the expectations, you realize you did have an expectation and it's not met, is we use the word oftentimes disconnect or something equivalent to that. Like something's wrong, right? So we attribute a word, and this is why to me words matter so much. We attribute a word, we put a word to that particular situation, we name it.
Yep.
Now, naming is something that humans have always done, right? We've named things. We name even spiritually speaking, we name God. We give God a name, right? We give everything a name. It's like categorizing our world, plants, animals, people. We have names for cities. We have names for everything as a means for organization and as a means to having a better sense of the world.
Yeah, which gives us more of a sense of safety and control.
Yeah, absolutely. And so like, what happens when you name something, a situation like this is bad, and when you hear lots of other couples doing the same thing, now you get sort of a culture around these shifts that happen dynamically in relationships. Right. I mean, I go to the gym. How many times have I heard guys go, oh yeah, wives always change, right? Same thing with wives. I've heard women say, oh yeah, husbands always change. There's like a negative thing about the fact that shifts happen, changes happen, your own expectations don't always get met. Growth is a natural result of just being human, evolution. Even if it's not growth, if you don't even want to say it's growth, maybe you want to say it's just change. Well, change is the only constant in the world. And so we name it, and we name it as bad, or we name it as disconnection between myself and another person.
And the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening will greatly influence the actions that we take to solve whatever problem we think we are facing. So if we name something bad, we are actually creating a protective around ourselves. We're saying that's bad, therefore it's something I have to protect myself from. Mm-hmm. And therefore then I subconsciously or otherwise start to make decisions. I start to make plans. I start to do things in order to protect myself from what I have named now as bad. Instead of naming it something like, well, that's interesting, or that's something to be explored. That's something we need to ask questions about. This is something we need to figure out. Like, what is that? Let's talk about it. Let's sort through it. I always make this joke whenever we're watching a movie, especially romantic movies. I wonder if this is the part where they're going to have some kind of misunderstanding. Because so many of those movies, the entire plot would be ruined with one honest conversation. But the thing is, I see people doing it at this stage in their lives too. Like where something happens where it's not what I expected. I tell myself a story about it, and it creates this whole additional plot of struggle that didn't actually need to be introduced, but it's because of the stories we told ourselves, because of how we named it.
Yeah. The disorientation that we feel is normal, and it's okay to even say, I feel uncomfortable. So even before curiosity, it's fine to say like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. This is distressing for sure. Like, yes, it is. But so use those words, because those are better words than saying, this is bad. We are disconnecting. We are not in alignment with each other. There's a problem. I mean, these are all words that are like, you're making judgment statements about the situation. It produces so much darkness, and it's not open to the possibility that this is actually a good thing. You're already naming it as a bad thing. Yeah. And so whatever decision you're going to make, as you said, is a result of the way you name that thing. But if you named it as, oh no, I'm uncomfortable by this change, for sure. I'm uncomfortable. I feel like you have changed in some regards, and my interpretation of it is this. That's even okay to say.
Right.
But I recognize that this is how I'm experiencing it. And I also know that change is necessary, and oftentimes some good things can emerge from it. So if we take that approach and that disposition, it gives us a chance, I think, at navigating that change, the shift in expectations.
Yep.
It gives it a chance to actually become something good.
Yeah, because all of those is naming it in a more neutral way instead of assigning a value to the disruption, which is where a lot of us can go wrong. And this can happen because of an external circumstance. Like major disruptions in relationships comes from, a job loss or like the loss of someone close to you. Or there's a lot of things where a external thing can disrupt the relationship. But then a lot of times it's these internal things. And so it can feel like we're not just fighting against the external world, we're fighting against this internal world as well. One of the most famous rom-com writers of all time, Nora Ephron, who wrote When Harry Met Sally, You've Got Mail, Sleeps with Seattle, all those. She talks about when you're creating a plot, she's like, you approach it in two ways. She says one of them is sort of the Gentile way and the other is the Jewish way. That's how she put it. She says, the Gentile way is there's some kind of external obstacle to overcome. She's like, the Jewish one is there's like an internal obstacle that the characters have to deal with within themselves. When Harry Met Sally, it's like the internal battle of their story, the relationships. And the Sleepless in Seattle, it's this external thing of like a distance that has to be overcome. And it's funny that most of these stories, and I do think we see ourselves in these stories more than we'd like to admit sometimes, it's the Beauty and the Beast. So she is this like fabulous, princess almost kind of character. And then she meets this man who needs to be, he's maybe handsome, but he could be like dangerous or mysterious or damaged. And he has some kind of internal battle that she helps him with. And so a lot of women see themselves in this role of like, I'm going to help him overcome this like perceived internal battle. And a lot of times for men, it's the knight and the damsel. So she is, beautiful and talented and all this stuff, but she faces an external struggle that the man thinks I can help her with. Yeah. And so a lot of times you see that, this is why so many couples have this disorientation and she's like, don't solve this, just listen to me. Cause it's like, but I want to be the knight. That's how I see my role. And so I want to help fix this external thing that I see. And then he's like, I'm just going about my business. But she's thinking like you have some kind of internal struggle and tries to pull out what could possibly need to be altered. And so if you want to watch every movie and put them into a category, most of them fall into he's helping her solve some external problem, threat, or she is helping him process and become something different internal as he struggles. And so we bring those stories that really do inform us into our relationships. And when we hit this thing where the major chemicals that tend to run the first stages of the relationship fade, all of a sudden, now we're at this kind of point where we're dealing with these kinds of things.
Oh, we've talked even about savior, victim kind of parallels that oftentimes function together, in relationships where someone is more of the savior type, someone's more of the victim type, and that becomes part of what has brought this couple together. You know? And I can distinctly point to areas where both of us, Patty and I, are both savior types, but we would have areas where we would switch roles. Yeah. Where I was more the victim, she was more the savior. Areas where I was more the savior, she was more the victim.
I think most couples experience that at some point.
Yeah. And those are moments of, whew, boy, it's time to grow up in this area. I don't like this, but it's time to grow up in both areas. Both like, oh yeah, I'm being the savior because I don't want to deal with something internal, or I'm being a victim because I don't want to take responsibility for something. And then doing that shifted the nature of a relationship, which of course creates the big C word, the big conflict. It's like, oh, this way that we've always functioned, this orientation, our puzzle pieces fit together with, based upon all of our past, ways of interacting, based upon our past levels of health and unhealth. All those things somehow manage to fit together as puzzle pieces between the two of us. Well, now what happens when you stop behaving a particular way, or you start behaving in a new way, or you start having new ways of thinking? Well, then the puzzle piece no longer fits. And so we call that bad. when it is a disorientation, it's an opportunity for growth. And so, okay, right. So I'm under responsible in this way, or I'm over responsible in this way. Okay, so how do I grow? How do I shift? What am I being invited into? And that's why we said in the previous episode that the first stage is about the shared. It's about the bonding. Yeah. It's not about the differences. It's not about the disagreements. It's about this. But you can go so long with that. And if you stay stuck in that stage because it's your preferred state of being, then you don't deepen. Right. You just have to keep going over those same things.
And we deny the things we should be paying attention to in order to stay in this kind of fantasy place. But
we do deny. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. I've done plenty of that.
If I communicated anything at this, as far as in terms of hope, when we're going into this stage, I want it to be very clear, known, and valued that this is normal. That it is extremely normal, natural, and it should and will happen with the person that you feel the most connection with in the world, that is the best, greatest person that you're the two greatest people in the world. You will have a point where you go, oh crap.
Yeah.
The thing is, people's internal voices, like we have to go back to this thing about the story we tell ourselves about the thing. For some, the immediate thing is like, is this a sign that this is not good? Is this a sign that this isn't my right person, right? So I hear that sometimes.
Yeah.
Is this something where I need to start looking for the exit? And others go, this is a chance for growth. Mm-hmm. Is this a chance that we actually grow and we get better and we heal? And the assumption that both of us actually want that.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that. Like, yeah.
Because sometimes I've met couples where one person is hitting that disorientation and they're going, this is great. We're hitting at this place and this is an opportunity for us both to grow and change. Yeah. And we can use this as fuel to build and deepen our relationship. And the other's going like, is this a sign that this is not right?
Yeah.
And for some, they take any kind of disconnection as a sign that something isn't right.
There's one that come to mind is again, this is why it's so practical. It's like a couple that I was coaching where you meet each other and you connect around your current state. Let's call it your current state.
Current reality.
Your current world. Yeah.
Yes.
And that is filled with great, and it's also filled with a lot of not so great.
Right.
And that is who we are, which is why disconnection, disorientation is fantastic because it means you're going to grow. It means that you have an opportunity for that.
If you use it.
Yeah. But then what happens is you have one of the partners oftentimes who says, I don't want to grow. I don't want to change.
Yeah.
I liked our previous state, which is like, you need me in a certain way, which gives me a sense of power. I need you in a certain way, which gives you a sense of power. And I'm okay with that arrangement. I'm okay with that agreement. It's like that we start to treat each other as again, referring to this guy I keep just referring to too much, Martin Buber, talks about the I-it, the I-you relationship. We treat people as like they become an it. At first they're a you because there's this sort of like, oh, wow, I don't know who you are. There's this approach to a person that is like, you are infinitely different or beyond me. I don't understand you. And because of that openness and that curiosity, we are discovering they're having an impact on us. And particularly in that chemistry stage, we are very open to being impacted.
Yes.
It's a very interesting stage because that's the only time I think that we're very, very open to being impacted by another person, another human being.
The neurological chemistry of that statement is accurate scientifically. It is very accurate.
And experientially, we see it all the time. It is hilarious. It's like your kid comes home, if your teenage kid comes home is in love with all of a sudden, it's like they're willing to take a shower every day. What the F happens?
There's a new world.
Who are you?
A new world is created.
Yeah. Yes. It's like so interesting because this kid who is not refused to be impacted and affected now is allowing himself to be impacted by the world, by the person that they're in love with. And so then what happens when we get to this other stage is that we stop. We move more towards now a transactional kind of relationship where you are a set of features and qualities and characteristics, and I am one too. We even treat ourselves as its as well, where it's like I'm in this kind of box. And when people who say that, it's like, no, this is who I am. I don't change. It's like, well, you've treated yourself as a box. You've put yourself in a box. You've treated yourself as an it, a set of features, characteristics, traits, and not as this moving, ever-evolving, ever-growing person. You're no longer a person at that point. You're something else. You're an individual maybe, but you're not a person. And I think that's the danger in what happens when we stay there too long. That's the danger. It's not that there's something wrong with going to the it stage. It's that it stage becomes the end of growth again. Right. You either stop in the first stage or you stop at the second stage, but you don't navigate the stage well. That's the problem we're addressing is couples and relationships.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like this is what we see all the time.
Yeah.
Sometimes we are a lot more open at the beginning, but a lot of times like the reason we have this openness and the acceptance of the other is because it's theoretical, because there's so much projection going on, because we are looking at the other person as a fulfillment of an it. So we're not even quite like seeing them as a distinct person yet. It's actually this stage that the personhood really emerges in a much more full Technicolor version, because often
it's the
at the
potential
beginning,
is there.
The potential, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times at the beginning we're seeing the potential. We're seeing what could be.
That's true.
And we're
potential oriented. Yeah, I agree.
And we're more accepting in general of that person.
That's true.
When they are different.
That's true.
All of this is going on. And all of these things suddenly go, it was fine back then, but now we're at this other stage and this person should be acting this way.
Yeah. But we were blind, though. Love is blind. There's actual data to support that. It's like there's a blinding effect of the brain.
There's a blinding to the negative.
Yeah.
But the positive is more open. And I think I've always struggled with that phrase, the love is blind, because it's only blinding certain things. Another way you're actually seeing in a way that you weren't able to see before.
Yeah, for sure. You see a lot of possibility, potential. You see the person in their best light. You see,
You see what they could be.
Yeah.
You're seeing who you could be with them, because all of a sudden, like, I'm like taking better care of myself.
Yeah.
And I'm doing this, and I'm becoming more of who I think I should be. So I think love is the widest gaze when it's the real thing.
Well, love.
Yes.
But maybe
love.
not attractional.
No. Attraction is the potential that maybe we could get to the widest.
We could get to that widest. Yeah. Because once we get to the third C, that's where we start to see love in greater display.
Right.
So this is where, so similarity now goes to difference. And the difference is where we're saying this potential for growth, this potential for
all new life is generated in difference. Like you had a thing on this, like you need similarity for attraction, but you need difference for reproduction.
For reproduction, yes.
Right.
Yeah. And that's why it's like, how do you handle that which is different?
Yeah.
People that are different, things that are, it's like, well, I don't like it. Well, nobody does. That's welcome to the human race. This is what we are, seem to be biologically hardwired to feel safe around that which is similar to us, but there's still this weird side of our brain that's strangely attracted to that which is also different. We fear it, we try to control it, but there's also something slightly attractive or greatly attractive, depending upon the personality.
Yes.
I think that makes a big difference. We are compelled by that which is different, because that which is different is what causes growth. And that's where the potential lies. But where I fear that we get stuck, a lot of relationships, is at this very juncture that we're talking about. This is the point at which so many relationships fall apart and go in separate ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having this reflection when I was pastoring, where there were some people, this was my great disillusionment, was people that came, I believed, wanted to grow, wanted to take responsibility for their lives, really wanted to begin their own hero's journey. And I was surprised that people didn't. It was always a surprise to me.
I just want you to reinforce what I already think and support that. I just want you to do that. I don't want you to challenge me in any way.
Or exactly, or make the problem go away. Like,
make me feel better.
Make me feel better.
Right.
Make the problem go away. And so people would leave right at the point at which like I'd share something on a Sunday that was provocative, that was challenging.
Yeah.
And then someone would come up to me and say, you know what, I'm done. I'm leaving. Okay. And you're leaving why? Because this, and this. Okay. And I'd watch this. I'd watch these people that would come in and go, oh, I love everything about this. Like so open, so different. So I love that. Start to grow, be challenged. Definitely. They're like, wow, this is really challenging. But they're growing. They're desperate enough to
But they're excited.
respond. And they're excited.
So yes.
And they're growing and growing and they're seeing change in their lives.
Yep.
And then they'd hit a certain point and go, they didn't like the challenge anymore. They didn't like the next thing. And they would say,
I want it to feel like it did back then.
Exactly. Like I was comfortable back then. Well, you weren't then, but you were growing.
Yeah.
But now, like all of us, we get to a point oftentimes where it's like, okay, I don't want this anymore. And I'm not saying I did this, perfect or even well. But that's where I feared was like, you're going to stop your own growth now. It doesn't matter where you go because the opportunity for challenge, and it'll show up everywhere in your life. But my hope is that even down the road, when the challenge for growth happens again, that you will take it. Because if you don't, you start to really harden. Like the mind hardens around stasis. It's like, I don't want any more. And now I resist that change. And when the opportunity comes again, we resist it. And every time we resist it, we get stronger in our resistance to that. And that was my concern, is that they would end up not actually ever growing beyond that point. And that's the same thing with relationships. It's like you get to a point where, okay, we've adapted, we've grown together, but now we stop because it's uncomfortable. And as a result, that's where the relationship then parts. But then if you part and you go and you find somebody else, what you're finding is somebody who won't challenge you in that same way. And if they do, then you will part and go elsewhere. And every time you do that, you are becoming more resistant to change. And you yourself become an it. And you are no longer this person that's evolving and growing. And ultimately, and I think this is true for most of us on this planet, is ultimately most of us want to do something to leave this world a better place. We want to do something good. We want to shine our light in some way. And so for me, this is where it's like relationships are the furnace. It's the perfect furnace for real growth and transformation.
It's good.
I can fool my way through a lot of relationships outside, but I can't do that in my relationship with my wife.
Yeah.
She knows me too well, right? And my patterns show up much more in the home than they do outside the home.
That's true for everyone. I've told people about this when it comes to growth. I said, you want to start growing, you want to start changing all of your relationships. But I said, you're going to practice easiest on strangers. Then the next concentric circle in is your work relationships. The next concentric circle in is your friendships. You can start to work on it there. Then your family at home, the people you live with, your nuclear or whatever, the closest to you. And lastly is your family of origin. That's the absolute hardest one to enact your growth in a lot of times. But it's usually between your family of origin or your most intimate relationships. That's the hardest area.
Final frontier.
That's the final frontier of growth for everyone. So
really
be a little gracious on yourself.
Yeah. We tell people all the time, don't start at home. Don't start at home. That's too risky.
Yeah, and if you're just like new to the Enneagram and you're like, I'm going to fix my partner with this, and no,
you won't.
We've seen that go.
That'll backfire.
Because it has to be an invitation, not a forced or
compelling or
can't be compelled to do it.
Yeah,
but like this stage, it can produce a lot of negative energy for people. There can produce a lot of fear. It can produce anxiety. It can produce like a sadness or a disappointment or disillusionment. It can create a frustration or an anger. Depending on your center, one of those will emerge. And I think there's two great gifts you need to bring to this stage. One is the awareness and the higher authenticity, that higher reality we're talking about, that it is normal. And the second is the gift of curiosity. Because curiosity is what bonds people at the beginning. It's like, that's why they'll stay up late talking to each other with this new person. I want to know who you are. And I never dated during the world of texting, but they're just texting constantly all day, just checking in and communicating with each other. And it's like, because I want to know what you're experiencing. What's it life's like for you? I want to see how you respond to things. I want to know. And then all of a sudden, if we're in a relationship too long and we lose this element or we experience this disorientation, we start to go like, you're not doing the thing now, or what does this mean now? And so we actually lose that sense of curiosity. And curiosity has to be an absolute fuel and centerpiece for a relationship. If we're not asking, well, what is it like to be you right now? Instead of being like, well, you're not supposed to be like that right now. Like those are two very different responses, which can happen to the exact same situation.
Yeah. I think, what are some tips that we could give that are helpful in engaging this stage? Like we've already named a bunch of them.
The very first thing you have to tell yourself is like, this is normal. This is good.
Becoming comfortable with what is uncomfortable.
Like, oh, look at it as an arrival and not as a problem that something has gone terribly wrong.
Like an arrival at a stage. Like we've arrived at this point.
Yeah. Like, yay, we're going into the next one. I've had friends literally like call me or text me or something and it's just like, well, we've gotten to this phase now that I've been talking to them about this for years.
We're here.
Yeah, I've had friends like message me and be like, well, I think we've officially left the cocaine brain phase of the relationship. Like that early stage where everything was like so amazing and so wonderful and like, oh, we're here now. And there's a little bit of like like, because that was really great. But there's also kind of a, hey, we're moving forward. This is real now. Like this is interesting.
Yeah.
I actually have to be more curious. I have to be more engaged. I have to ask questions that I didn't ask before. I have to share stuff I wasn't sure I wanted to.
What would you say about hope? I don't know if I would say you should have hope or be hopeful or just like fake it till you make it. Because I think hope is like you lose hope. I can distinctly remember those moments over the course of my marriage, and it still, even to this day, will happen where it's like, the hope just drops out of your chest. It's like that feeling of, are we stuck? Are we really going to make it? There is that question that arises within us.
Do I want to?
Yeah, or do I want to, right? The desire. So I think it's just checking in with your heart center. Like you're going to feel this complete loss in the heart center. Yeah. It feels so real. That's the thing, is it feels like it's final, it's over, we're not going to make it. It feels so real, it's hard to believe that it's not.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. Like when I was saying to the normalize and like you've hit the stage, it's like when you're first there, right? So this is like you've moved through that first stage and you're first experiencing that. There can be a sense of like, oh, we're at a new stage that can be hopeful. But when this comes back around, the next disruption comes up and you're, 10, 20, 30, 40 years into a relationship and it starts and you experience this, it is very different.
Yeah.
I still think that curiosity is such an important part of this to go, man, what am I bumping up against here? Like what is actually happening?
Yeah. And you're talking about the head center. And I think it's helpful for us to work through the three centers to process this.
Yeah.
Because I think the heart center does say, you do have to be, you don't have to be, but this is what the invitation is give yourself lots of grace and space to be disillusioned.
To be disappointed.
To feel disappointed, to feel sad, to feel let down, to feel even hopeless. The feeling of hopeless. There's a difference, I think, between the feeling of hopelessness and the belief that it's hopeless.
Right.
I think we need to separate the heart center from the head and to say the feeling is that there's no hope.
This
and
is
to
why,
own that and to be okay with that and to actually show love to your heart center. Yes. Completely. I love you. You're absolutely right in feeling what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Validation is critical. There's a difference between validating interpretations of our feelings and validating the feelings. And this is a tricky one for a lot of people because they can't distinguish the difference early on in the Enneagram work between those two things. You can validate the experience of feeling, I feel hopeless. I feel disappointed. I feel let down. I feel like this is over. I feel like there's a lot of feeling there. Yes. Validate those feelings. Absolutely. They're true. They're true. They're true feelings. They're true feelings. But there's a difference between validating that and validating it's over, like we're done, we're not moving forward.
Yeah, this equals that.
Yeah, this equals that. It's, see if you can separate those two out and just be like, that's what my feeling is. And it's certainly affecting my thinking. Like I'm having a hard time thinking clearly about this. So I think it's okay for you to stay in that stage for a little bit. Like, don't be quick to solving this. Don't be quick to saying, well, I have to become curious. I have to move forward to being, willing to discover how growth can happen here. I think hold back for a little bit. It may take you a week. It may take you a month, but just be clear and communicate with your partner, I am in the stage. That's all. It's just that I'm feeling a lot of feelings. I need to work through them. That doesn't mean anything about the state of our relationship. It's just the state of my heart right now. I'm feeling these feelings. Now, if your partner wants to talk about it and you feel like you can, then I think that that's appropriate to say, this is how I feel. I feel hopeless. I feel disappointed. I feel let down. My wife and I have done this both with each other, shared our feelings, worked at separating it out from interpretation. And when we interpret and add interpretations, we have to walk that back and go okay, that was an interpretation. That's not a feeling, but this is my feeling around this. And, sometimes I used to say this is kind of humorous, but hey, when you're describing your feelings, don't say something like, I feel like you're an idiot. That is not a feeling.
Not a feeling. That's an accusation.
That's a judgment. That's so your feeling is, I feel alone, I feel hurt, I feel disappointed. You can add an interpretation. This is my view. This is how I'm interpreting this, but I'm open to your feedback on this. But don't be quick to move to that because if you're so full of emotion at that moment, so full, and I should say they're very intense and very strong inside you, those emotions, your mind won't be very clear. And to expect that you should be clear and to try to jump in to try to solve it, you will actually make it messier and more difficult for yourself and for your partner. It's just stay at the stage of the heart for a little bit longer. This is what we feel. We're okay. We're just having a lot of these feelings and we need to work through them, meaning allow them to be. Separate them from interpretation in your own mind, recognize when you're doing it, and be okay with yourself. Just yep, grace to me. I'm doing it again. Take a deep breath. This is how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And then I think you'll start to feel it dial down a little bit, start to relax and rest.
It definitely does.
And it's at that point that oftentimes, me included, it's okay, I don't want to revisit this again. And that's when we close the door on that difference and we don't deal with it. And it becomes something that we wait until the next time where that shows up again and it rears its ugly head.
Yeah.
And we're oh.
But maybe you can do it 1% better.
That's a good point. That's a fair point.
I think that's so much of what it comes down to is those issues, those things are going to come back. But can you make yourself that 1% better? And for some of us, we have a hard time naming those emotions, especially if they're newer to this work. Well,
you should make a wheel.
There's a really great feelings wheel at the Art of Growth website you can download for free or print out for not free, even though it makes no profit. But you can still get it printed.
We're so good at business, Jim.
I know, right? We're so good at that. But I think this is why so many people resonate with Brené Brown's thing about the story I'm telling myself.
Yeah. That's
and
such
I think
a great
that
line.
is huge for the stage because it does a couple different things. And I think one of the most important is it takes ownership. Because I think one of the things that really goes wrong at the stage is I am making you responsible for the feelings I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm removing myself from the responsibility and I'm putting the responsibility of the way I'm feeling on you. And I think anything you can do to curb that, what you're saying about naming the emotions, saying that you're experiencing the feelings without putting it on them, and then also this piece of the ownership of the story. So I'm admitting I've created interpretation that I'm telling myself. So this is something I am doing. I'm not saying it's something that you're doing.
Right.
And by sharing this, I'm assuming positive intent from you. By saying this statement of the story I'm telling myself, I am making this an offering because you get to speak into this story too now. It's not something I'm internalizing and therefore 100% accepting and I'm going to make decisions based on. So I'm trying to keep all of that from happening by acknowledging the emotion that I'm feeling and by saying this is the story I'm telling myself. And that is an invitation to say, okay, so now we're going to do this together and I'm not going to be doing this in isolation where you are an it, where I've made you a character and I've given you lines. Because that's so often where I see couples go really wrong in this space is I have a narrative, I have an expectation, something gets violated, that's normal. But then I am now filling in the story. I've given you lines already that I am expecting you to say. And so I'm not in this curiosity space. And then the disruption that is a natural thing to feel gets multiplied because we're adding energy to the negative side of it. We're adding energy to the disconnection instead of what we are recommending is add energy to the openness, add energy to the solution, add energy to the curiosity, to the owning of your own feelings, to the acknowledgement of the disorientation, the sadness, the frustration, the anxiety that you're feeling. Add energy to owning that, acknowledging that, and then moving forward.
Yeah, there's the curiosity can lead people down a path of questioning with skepticism, and then the other person having to prove themselves in a no-winning battle. Like I can say whatever I want, but it seems like you've always got another question to doubt that.
Well, that's leading the witness, not real genuine curiosity.
It's not genuine curiosity. It's the curiosity, I think, is like I'm open to hearing from you. It's not that you have to believe everything because there are people and their partners who we all are a mix of intentions. And
for sure.
Wait, and there's So I know. Surprise. It's not that you're going to have perfect intentions every time, nor is your partner going to have perfect intentions. But what you're wanting to do is at least give the person the chance to be truthful and honest. And I think if we demonstrate that acceptance and that grace, then it allows that person to be a bit more forthright and a bit more truthful about things like, no, I could definitely see that I was trying to do this, or, I can own that part. And when we take that approach of like, great, thank you for that. And then not to demand change from each other. This is a huge component. Because I've seen this happen so many times in relationships where people demand change of themselves and of their partners.
Yep.
And when they do that, it's like you have just set yourself up for a major failure, major disappointment. Both that you will disappoint yourself because you won't live up to your own, and you'll disappoint the other person. And I don't care how disciplined you are. I don't care how much willpower you have. You will disappoint yourself and your partner. It is important for us to give each other the space to fail. You will screw this up again. That is not the real problem, folks. Now, I'm talking about within a range of normalcy here. We're not talking about like your partner is doing something criminal that is dangerous to you. I'm talking about like within that range of what we would call normal relationship behaviors. You're going to have disappointments. They are going to let you down. You're going to let them down. The problem, that isn't the problem. The problem is when you get stuck there and either you're not admitting it or you're not taking responsibility for it. When you fail, that's when I think you say, here's what's going to happen. You and I are going to fail each other. We're going to make these mistakes again. When we fail, do we have a way of returning? Do we have, I love that word, the return. How do you return? How do you come back to each other?
Yeah.
What is the repair? That's another word you've used a lot. How do you, what's the repair mechanism?
Right.
Not what ensures that we won't fail, but what helps us to come back. It's like saying, you will never get sick. No, you have an immune system. You will get sick.
Yep.
But the immune system is there for that reason. So what's the immune system for the relationship?
Yeah. Well, you just named something else I think is super important, which is we were talking about putting the emotional responsibility on the other person. What you're talking about right here is like the expectations of how you're going to behave or what you're going to do. Like I have this expectation of you, and we hit this point of disorientation because it's not happening. I now make you responsible for my expectation. I've seen that have a major impact on relationships that I've witnessed where, yes, I thought we were going to be somewhere else by now. I thought you would do. And I thought if you did this, you would become more like this. And the other person can often be like, well, that was never who I was. I mean, I've been like I am who I've always been. But I see it being extremely detrimental to relationships when all of a sudden I make you responsible for my expectation of you.
Yeah, I think it's coming back to what is your responsibility, what is your job in this, in this moment, and allowing the other person to, to do that as well. I think the point of that, the actual disorientation, is for a greater sense of who am I outside the relationship. I think if we were to take a 30,000 foot view, what is kind of the movement, the arc, the trajectory growth-wise when that happens? Individuation is a necessary part of growth. You will pull back away from the person and realize, like, I am pulling back. I am. I can feel it. I'm pulling back. Yeah, good. That's important because you're having to develop who you are a little bit more outside of the relationship so that you can come back in to the relationship at a greater level of connection.
Yeah.
Connection is not this complete immersion and merging with another person.
Right.
It is not loss of self and loss of identity. It is the ability to hold both, but without being fixed in either one. And then when those two come together, it's like, oh, that's what is so awesome that I can accept your differences, and somehow those do not separate us. They feel wonderful. Like I can honor those things. So I think that is what happens there. So to expect that you will pull back, with the greater moments of disorientation, that's when you're going to feel yourself pulling back. Otherwise, you're going to go to trying to keep what was and return to what was, and never like, we need to go back, we need to go back, we need to go back. Yeah. No, you need to go forward. And there is no going back. There's only going forward. And then in going forward, that's where you have that chance to reorient your puzzle pieces, as it were. You're reorienting them, in a new fashion of connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, because the gift of this stage is growth. None of us really grow without resistance. And the people who are closest to us are supposed to provide a certain kind of resistance. And that creates a challenge that actually grows us into the kind of people we need to become. It is psychologically damaging for us to always get our way.
It's hugely it's so funny how that's never, like, hardly ever talked about, and yet that is so bad for us.
It's horrible for us. Like, this is the Michael Jackson scenario. This is like celebrities, and I think of Bono has a song where he says, "I'm still a child because no one tells me no." He's doing this character in this song, and it's like, that's so much of what celebrity can do, where you have all the power, the money, no one says no, no one resists you, which is, I think, one, it's very hard to have stable relationships in that kind of a context. When you look at celebrities and relationships, like, one of the reasons is resistance. It changes us. And it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And when you don't have enough resistance in your life, your maturity is stunted by a lack of resistance. And so it is a gift to have someone in your life that creates some kind of resistance. And a lot of times you have a good bonding experience that happens before you hit that resistance, and that's a wonderful gift. That's what you hope for.
Yeah.
But when you hit the resistance, like, that is for your growth.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So work through this stage with these kind of the steps that we've given to you. Try them, and then please add to them, because these are by no means perfect or comprehensive.
Right.
The last word on this. We're exploring this out loud.
Yeah, I mean, every couple we meet with, like, it's going to be a very different embodiment of these things. So, like, this is, we always say that there's certain things we can do on podcasts, but there's certain things we just can't do, because it's so specific to your story a lot of times. It's good to understand the fundamentals, the fundamental structure of this, especially if you're younger, if you're in one of these early stages and you haven't, like, run into a ton of this yet, which a lot of our listeners are, we know. It's okay. Like, you're going to go through these stages, and it can be incredibly beneficial. Like, I would not be who I am without the resistances of marriage, of fatherhood, of all of those things. Those are gifts. And I think a lot of people have concern or a worry that I did, which was that if I did get married or if I became a father, that I would somehow be diminished, right? That I would actually become less of myself. But I have found the opposite to be true.
No, absolutely.
That the resistance has created me into a person that I have so much more respect for than the person who I was before I met that resistance, or who I would have been if I didn't have that resistance.
I know that some of you are like, well, you said heart stuff and a little bit on the head. Is there anything on the body? So so the heart again is be gracious to your emotions. See if you can separate them out from your interpretations. In the head center, acknowledge your interpretations. Be curious, ask questions, and see if you can organize things. Don't fix things at this stage. Because at this stage of disorientation, you do not have the awareness yet to know what's the reorientation. You only have the awareness that you are in a disorientation. And so do some processing through the head center of like trying to organize what's going on here. Yeah. Where are we at? And what's happening here? Without these sort of naming things as bad, but just keeping things in that like, it feels like we're separating in some, but there might be some separation we need in order to individuate, in order to understand who we are. And then I think, reaffirm, in the head center through words, reaffirm that you want the best and you believe the best for both of you. And don't make any drastic decisions of like, we're going to shift, we're going to change, we're going to separate, we're going to whatever. Don't make any drastic decisions. Stay like curious and open, and you're still in the stage of we are disoriented. We don't know what's next, nor are we going to forecast it. But for now, we're going to continue just keeping that staying in the tension of that. And none of us like tension. We want to go immediately to one side or the other, but stay in the tension. And then thirdly, the body center. If you can, reconnect physically, hold hands, hugs, go for a walk together, continue the rhythms, continue the first stage that we talked about, the bonding, the sharing the stuff, and continue some laughing together. And whatever things that you can do that are together kind of experiences. I was watching a comedy show last night, and the comedian was saying what's amazing is from in Brooklyn, the setting. He's like, look at how diverse this group is. But when we laugh together, what happens? It was like really beautiful. Like when we laugh together, we are aligning together. We feel together. And so that's a shared body experience, not only occupying the same space, but laughing together. And my wife and I were laughing hysterically at this comedian last night. Really hilarious. And it was like, we have something that bonds us together. And now we're going to be sharing this joke that is really, really funny with each other. There's a couple lines that he had. And that is something that helps that body center to kind of come back to, we're grounded, we're together, we're okay.
Yeah, I love that. Because the most intimate relationships in our lives are three-centered. And that's an important element, that this is one of the unique things about this intimate relationship, is that it does have all three centers, and it does comprise of these. There's a connection that is deep emotionally in the past. There's a friendship connection in the headspace with curiosity and conversation. And there is physical connection in the body space. Yes, touch, hug, sexuality, all of those things are like methods of connection.
Yes,
and the body is an incredible tool for connection. This was something that we had as a rule, actually, when we were our first year that we were married, where a lot of conflicts came up, a lot of like disorientation comes up. And so we had it as a thing that we would be physically in contact when we were having a conversation like that, because you get amped up in those conversations, and physical connection lowers that. It reminds you that it's not me versus you, that it's us versus this external thing, but we're together and we can figure it out. And so there's something about that. So that first year, whenever we would have conflict, is we would have physical connection. But the thing is also, we there's different, because you were talking about individuation. I think this is a very important part. she would be like, I need to take some time. And I was like, no, we need to talk about this right now. And she's like, no, but I need time to kind of like to process my own thoughts and feelings and know how I feel. She'd like disappear for a couple hours in the back room. And then she'd come out and she'd be like, I'm ready. Usually at that point, I was like, I don't even remember what we were talking about. Like, but I'd moved up. But I saw that as conflict avoidant. And she saw it as pressure. But we learned like we're just different in this way. And then you get to move out of that right and wrong and into different, which is part of the growth process, right? And then we would have to physically connect because we want to body connect in order to heart connect, in order to get in the head and solve this thing to know what we want to do differently. That we have to go through all three stages, all three centers, rather. We have to go through all three centers in order to have this connection. And part of the hope is a lot of times when we experience this disorientation, we go, who are you, to our partner. The thing is, you were once strangers who didn't know each other. And you came together and learned to be together. So when the person becomes a stranger to you again, there's the possibility of rediscovering your partner in a new way.
Yeah.
And I think that is beautiful.
That's the waterfall. This has been used before as an analogy for things that are meant to be always in movement, but yet get frozen. It's like the waterfall is always in motion. It's never the same. But when we take a picture of it, it becomes fixed. And that's what we love when it comes to our treatment of each other. It's like you're a fixed set of characteristics of behaviors that I can anticipate and predict. But then when that happens, it returns to the waterfall. And it's like, okay, there's movement again. And that's normal. And that's a good thing for us to experience is we will always be waterfalls to each other. But there are times where we become so familiar with the waterfall that it becomes something almost predictable and something we can anticipate. But then something will shift.
So thank you so much for listening, and you can find out more about us at theartofgrowth.org. If you've never taken an online Enneagram test or the Instincts test, please do that. It really helps you understand more about yourself and more about the closest people in your life. It's amazing to take the description of your type to someone who knows you really intimately and ask them questions about how they've experienced you in that way. That has been an absolute game changer for so many relationships we know. But for now, my friends, may you know that disruption is a normal part of connection. May you trust in the power of curiosity and conversation, not to lead you back to where you were, but forward to what you are becoming. May you remember that you were once strangers and came together. And so when you become strangers again, there's an opportunity to discover something new. Grace and growth, my friends.